Folks, we have a developing crisis that I need you to understand right now. While 475,000 Americans are still without power from Winter Storm Fern, while 42 people have died, and infrastructure is hanging by a thread, we now have another major storm developing that could deliver a devastating blow to areas already on their knees. This is not a drill. Models show increasing confidence that a significant coastal storm will develop this weekend, tracking directly toward regions still digging out from the worst winter storm in over 5 years. We're talking about a compound disaster scenario that could push emergency response beyond breaking point. The National Weather Service has begun issuing preliminary advisories for what could become a bomb cyclone along the East Coast. When meteorologists use terms like bomb cyclone while millions sit in cold, dark homes, you know we're looking at a potentially catastrophic situation. Let me break down exactly what we're dealing with here. Right now, 475,000 Americans are without electricity. Tennessee has over 250,000 customers in the dark. Mississippi has more than 130,000 without power. These aren't just numbers. These are families trying to stay warm in temperatures running 20 to 40 degrees below normal for late January. The infrastructure damage from Winter Storm Fern is staggering. We're not talking about a few downed power lines. Entire utility grids have been crippled by ice accumulations, exceeding an inch in some areas. Trees snapped like twigs under ice weight are still blocking roads and crushing power lines. Utility crews work around the clock, but they're telling residents in hardest-hit areas that power restoration could take weeks, not days. Now, as these same areas struggle to recover, a new storm system is organizing over the Gulf of Mexico. This developing low-pressure system is being fed by abundant Gulf moisture and will encounter a temperature contrast that could cause explosive intensification as it moves northeastward along the coast. The timing couldn't be worse. Storm development begins as early as Friday along the Gulf Coast, rapidly intensifying through Saturday and Sunday. Areas from Louisiana to Florida could see rain and wintry precipitation Friday night into Saturday morning. But the real concern is when this system reaches the Carolinas and mid-Atlantic. The same regions hammered by ice and snow just days ago are now in crosshairs for another potentially historic weather event. We're looking at significant snow accumulations from North Carolina through New England. Some model runs suggest snowfall totals exceeding a foot in areas already buried under snow from the previous storm. This is particularly dangerous because infrastructure is compromised. Power lines that survived Winter Storm Fern are now weakened and more susceptible to failure. Trees damaged but did not fall during the ice storm are now at risk of toppling with additional snow or ice weight. Roads barely cleared from the first storm could become impassable again. The human cost of this developing situation concerns me most. We already have warming centers at capacity across multiple states. Emergency shelters are stretched to their limits. Hospital emergency rooms are dealing with surges of cold-related injuries, carbon monoxide poisoning cases, and heart attacks from people overexerting themselves during cleanup efforts. If this weekend storm delivers the kind of impact that models are suggesting, we could see emergency services completely overwhelmed. Areas that lost cellular service during Winter Storm Fern and are just starting to get communications restored could be cut off again. The National Guard units activated in 12 states are already committed to ongoing recovery operations. The meteorological setup for this weekend's storm is particularly concerning because of something called a negative tilted trough. This is when the upper-level atmospheric pattern becomes highly amplified, creating conditions that can cause storm systems to rapidly intensify. When you combine this with the temperature contrast between the frigid air mass locked in place across the eastern United States and the warmer air over the Atlantic Ocean, you create a recipe for explosive storm development. Coastal areas are facing a triple threat from this system. First, there's the potential for significant snow accumulations. Second, winds could reach damaging levels, potentially causing widespread power outages in areas where the electrical grid is already compromised. Third, coastal flooding is a major concern as this storm could generate massive waves and storm surge along shorelines from the Carolinas to New England. The storm track is still being refined by forecast models, but even small changes in the path could have huge implications for specific areas. If the storm track's closer to the coast, areas inland could see primarily snow with accumulations potentially exceeding 18 inches in some locations. If the track shifts further offshore, coastal areas could see more of a mix of precipitation types, but destructive winds and flooding would become the primary concerns. What's particularly troubling is that some of the areas most likely to be impacted by this weekend storm are the same regions that have been devastated by Winter Storm Fern. The Tennessee Valley, which is still dealing with massive power outages, could see additional wintry precipitation. Parts of North Carolina and Virginia that are struggling to restore basic services could face another round of damaging weather. Tennessee is still reeling from the first storm, with utility companies like Middle Tennessee Electric telling customers that crews have been fighting tree after tree, and that as soon as they restore one line, another tree falls and knocks it back out. Now, with another storm potentially bringing more ice and snow to the region, These areas could see recovery efforts completely derailed. The situation in Virginia is equally concerning. The state reported 378 weather-related crashes during Winter Storm Fern, with 28 injuries. Many roads finally cleared are still in fragile condition, with damaged pavement and compromised drainage systems. Another major winter storm could make these roadways completely impassable for extended periods. The economic implications of back-to-back major weather events are staggering. Insurance companies are already estimating that Winter Storm Fern caused billions of dollars in damage. Now we're looking at the possibility of additional widespread damage before communities have had a chance to recover from the first storm. Small businesses that have been closed since Friday due to power outages could face extended closures that push many of them toward permanent closure. Supply chains that are already disrupted could be further complicated by another round of transportation problems. Trucking companies just resuming normal operations could face another complete shutdown of eastern routes. Rail systems that suffered damage from ice accumulation during the first storm have been working to repair infrastructure. But another major storm could cause additional damage to tracks, switches, and signaling equipment. The Port of New York and New Jersey, which handles billions in cargo monthly, is still dealing with reduced operations due to transportation access problems. Another major weather event could further disrupt container operations and international shipping schedules already weeks behind normal. Airlines are watching this developing situation very carefully. American Airlines, which called Winter Storm Fern the most disruptive storm in the company's 100-year history, is already making contingency plans for potential flight disruptions this weekend. The airline canceled more than 9,000 flights during the previous storm and is still dealing with crew scheduling problems and aircraft positioning issues from that event. Airports along the East Coast that are just starting to return to normal operations after canceling over 11,000 flights during the previous storm could face another round of massive cancellations. LaGuardia Airport in New York, Dallas-Fort Worth International, and Boston Logan International were among the hardest hit during Winter Storm Fern, and they're all in the potential impact zone for this weekend's developing storm. The cascading effects on aviation are particularly concerning because many southern airports don't have adequate de-icing equipment. This means modest amounts of ice or snow can lead to complete shutdowns at major hubs like Atlanta, Charlotte, and Nashville. When these airports close, it affects flights across the country because of interconnected airline routing systems. The National Weather Service's Weather Prediction Center has been issuing increasingly urgent language about this developing threat. Their latest discussions mention the potential for a significant impact event along the eastern seaboard. When forecasters start using language like that, while communities are still in crisis mode from the previous storm, it gets my attention immediately. The meteorological terminology being used is particularly noteworthy. References to high-impact winter weather and dangerous travel conditions appear in forecast discussions for areas still dealing with impassable roads. The Weather Service also highlights potential for prolonged power outages in regions where hundreds of thousands are still without electricity. One of the most concerning aspects of this situation is the timing relative to the current cold pattern. The Arctic air mass that brought record-breaking low temperatures across much of the eastern United States is not going anywhere. Extended forecasts show below-freezing temperatures persisting well into February in many areas. This means that any snow or ice that falls during the weekend storm could remain on the ground for an extended period, prolonging the impact on transportation and utility restoration efforts. The cold pattern is being reinforced by a negative Arctic oscillation, which locks frigid air over the continental United States. This pattern can persist for many weeks, meaning recovery challenges from both storms could extend into March. Emergency management officials across multiple states are already having to make difficult decisions about resource allocation. Do they continue to focus all available resources on recovery from Winter Storm Fern, or do they start shifting personnel and equipment to prepare for the next storm? The reality is that many jurisdictions don't have enough resources to do both effectively. The psychological impact on residents who are already dealing with extended power outages and dangerous conditions cannot be understated. Imagine being without heat and electricity for nearly a week, finally seeing utility crews in your neighborhood working to restore power, only to be told that another major storm is coming that could undo all the progress that's been made. Federal emergency management agencies are closely monitoring this developing situation. FEMA, which has already approved emergency declarations for multiple states affected by Winter Storm Fern, is preparing for the possibility of additional disaster declarations. The coordination challenges of managing ongoing recovery operations while simultaneously preparing for a new major weather event are enormous. Weather prediction models are showing remarkable agreement about the potential for significant impacts from this weekend storm, but the details are still being worked out. The European model is showing a more intense storm that tracks closer to the coast, which would bring heavy snow to major metropolitan areas from Washington, D.C. to Boston. The American GFS model has been consistently showing a similar scenario, which increases confidence in the overall forecast. What we're potentially looking at is a situation where some of the most densely populated areas of the United States could face back-to-back major winter storms within a span of less than a week. The Interstate 95 corridor, which is home to tens of millions of Americans, could see significant travel impacts again, just as transportation systems were starting to recover from the previous storm. The storm, as intensity, will largely depend on how much it can tap into the temperature contrast between the continental air mass and oceanic air. If conditions align correctly for rapid intensification, we could be looking at a storm that rivals or exceeds the impacts of Winter Storm Fern. The potential for a bomb cyclone, defined as a storm that drops at least 24 millibars of pressure in 24 hours, would bring the threat of damaging winds in addition to heavy snow. Coastal communities that are already dealing with infrastructure damage from the previous storm face particular vulnerability. Downed power lines near saltwater create especially dangerous conditions, and utility crews may not be able to safely work in coastal areas if high winds develop as forecasted. The compounding effects of multiple major weather events in rapid succession could push some communities beyond their ability to respond effectively. Rural areas that lost communication capabilities during Winter Storm Fern might find themselves completely isolated if the weakened storm brings additional infrastructure damage. This is exactly the type of situation that emergency management experts have been warning about as weather patterns become more extreme. Our infrastructure and emergency response systems are designed to handle periodic major events, but they're not built to manage back-to-back disasters of this magnitude. I'll be monitoring this developing situation closely and providing updates as forecast details become clearer. Right now, if you're in an area that was impacted by Winter Storm Fern and you haven't already done so, this is the time to ensure you have adequate supplies for an extended period without power. Don't assume that utility restoration efforts will continue uninterrupted if this weekend storm delivers the kind of impacts that are currently being forecast. For communities that are still dealing with the aftermath of Winter Storm Fern, the possibility of another major weather event represents a genuine crisis. Emergency shelters that are already at capacity could face impossible decisions about how to accommodate additional evacuees. Hospitals that are operating on backup power could face critical supply shortages if transportation disruptions continue. The next 48 to 72 hours will be critical for determining the exact track and intensity of this developing storm system. But based on current atmospheric patterns and model trends, residents across the eastern United States should prepare for the possibility that the weather crisis that began with Winter Storm Fern is far from over.